So welcome to our program, Protecting Our Vote and Democracy. This is a continuation of our education in action series. We are with Northern Nevada Marches Forward. We are a program that started, an organization that started after several years of the Reno Women's March. And we decided that, to keep moving forward, it would be best to form our own organization. And so that's what we've done. And besides the Reno Women's March, we do different programs throughout the year. We like to do, what should I do or what can I do programs, which are in person. But we've also found that our Education in Action series is very popular and very much, it's a great place to come and learn about different topics and different issues that are happening in our communities, and just having discussions that we need to be having. And so if you haven't seen our series before, you can definitely go to Northern Nevada Marches Forward.org, all spelled out, because we go big, and check on our Education in Action series. You just click on that link and it'll take you to our previous recorded programs, and this one will be up there as well. So I would like to just jump right on in. I'm Dayla. I am an officer on the board of directors for Northern Nevada Marches Forward. And, we wanted to do this voting program prior to, the ballots coming out. Where are my dogs? So we could encourage, sorry, one moment. Okay, people are home. They're very excited. But we wanted sure to make sure dog. They are a bit excited. Okay, so we wanted to put this on because we wanted to help encourage people to, look at their ballots.
Can someone get the dog to stop barking? It's really bothering me.
Yes, we're working on that. Thank you. So again, we're getting the program going because we want to make sure that people know and are comfortable with what's coming up with the upcoming election. And I'd like to start with a land acknowledgement. And so this is a quote: American Indians share a history rich in diversity, integrity, culture, and tradition. It is also rich in tragedy, deceit, and genocide. As the world learns of these atrocities and cries out for justice for all people everywhere, no human being should ever have to fear for his or her own life because of their political or religious beliefs. We are in this together, my friends, the rich, the poor, the red, white, black, brown, and yellow. We share responsibility for Mother Earth and those who live and breathe upon her. Never forget that. That's from Leonard Peltier. He's a Native American rights activist. And I am bringing land acknowledgement today from Northern Nevada Marches Forward. Even though we are meeting virtually, our communities in Nevada are located on treated and unceded ancestral lands of Washishu, Numu, Nuwuli, Niue, and Shoshone-Bannock, and Goshute. We would also like to acknowledge the painful and heartbreaking history of Indian schools. Nevada's only Indian boarding school, Stewart Indian School, is in Carson City. Indian schools were where kidnapped Indigenous children were taken to have their native culture taken from them. As Mr. Peltier said in the quote I opened this acknowledgement with, we are all in this together, my friends. In order to move forward as whole people, there is a lot of healing that must also be done. We must recognize wrongs done in the past, find ways to reconcile with living descendants, and put into place policies to make sure those histories aren't repeated. Thank you. So tonight's amazing speakers, we have Dr. Courtenay Burns, who's the Director of Government Relations with Waterford.org. We have Noé Orosco. I hope I didn't butcher that, Noé, I'm sorry. He is the Program Manager for Silver State Voices. And Jennifer Willett, the Nevada Grassroots Manager with All Voting is Local. And so I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I am going to allow for Dr. Burns to share her screen.
Thank you, Dayla. Alrighty. Make that full screen. And there we go. Hi, everyone. I am Courtenay Burns, like Dayla mentioned. And I am speaking today about the history of suffrage or enfranchisement in the United States. So that's the history of the right to vote and who gets it and who doesn't at different times. As we move forward from the founding of the United States to today. So the very first place that we see a very vague definition of who gets to vote in the United States is in Article 1, Section 2 of the Constitution. And that clause states that the House of Representatives shall be composed of members chosen every 2 years by the people of the several states, and the electors in each state shall have the qualifications requisite for electors of the most most numerous branch of the state legislature. Unfortunately, if you look past the 18th century legalese there, that doesn't really say very much. So ultimately, it means that the states get to decide who gets to vote and who doesn't. And until about 1870, that exclusively means white men who are at least 21 years old and who own property. Less than 2 years after the Constitution was ratified, Congress acted to set uniform rules for how the US would grant citizenship by naturalization. This is extremely important because with citizenship, you get lots of rights, including usually the right to vote. So over time, many groups will argue that the most important right that comes with citizenship is the right to vote, and that without the right to vote, you're not a full citizen. The Naturalization Act of 1790, though, restricted citizenship to free white persons of good moral character, meaning that it excluded Native Americans, it excluded indentured servants and slaves, it excluded free Black people, and it excluded Asians. You'll also notice that it doesn't explicitly exclude women, but in practice, the US had adopted the idea of coverture, which is the idea that women are property and that they belong to their husband's estates. And jurisprudence of the day essentially believed that women's loyalty was to her husband first, so she didn't need to vote because that would ask her to divide her loyalties. And the idea was that it would prevent women from moral depravity. I don't know why women experience moral depravity from voting and men don't, but whatever. It also impacts all rights like contracts, the ability to serve on a jury, because if you aren't a citizen, you can't serve on a jury, so you don't get to be tried by a jury of your peers, and also property. So the right to own your own property over pretty much anything, including things like bank accounts, and family rights. So particularly for women, that's the rights to your own children. And it should be noticed that there are many naturalization acts over time and other laws that impact naturalization and citizenship. This is just the first one. In general, though, a version of it was enforced until the Walter McCarran Act of 1952. So the next time we see a major change to US law impacting suffrage is as a result of the Civil War. The 14th Amendment extended citizenship to, in theory, all Black people, but really in practice to just Black men. And the 15th Amendment explicitly extended them the right to vote by stating that the US and states can't deny anyone the right to vote based on color, race, or previous condition of servitude. So while that's fabulous, right, white Southerners in particular, but not only white Southerners, weren't going to just let their former slaves participate in governing without a fight. Many states, primarily those of the now former Confederate States of America, moved quickly to enact laws that would prevent Black people from voting, and then backed those laws up with violence. As an aside, in the election of 1870, so the first election after Black men could vote, due to the 15th Amendment, Black men cast their ballots solidly for the Republican Party, and Black men were elected to a number of offices, including 6 congressional seats, 3 from South Carolina, 1 from Alabama, 1 from Florida, and 1 from Georgia, and 1 US Senate seat from Mississippi. So the next major enfranchisement we see is with the 19th Amendment. That's 50 years later. So Black men get the right to vote, and it's another 50 years before women get the right to vote. And really, that's white women who get the right to vote, because women of color are still going to experience the same barriers that men of color experience to voting, right? So this amendment formally extended the right to vote to about 26 million women in the United States. But again, that's real. We're really talking about white women, right up until the Civil Rights Movement. The next major group of people that we see is the Indian Citizenship Act of 1924. So while the 14th Amendment should have achieved this, and this is an act that formally declared that Native Americans were US citizens. While the 14th Amendment should have achieved this already, because it defines a citizen as any person born in the United States or naturalized into the United States, right? And subject to the laws and jurisdiction of the US, it was previously interpreted by the courts as not applying to Indigenous peoples. The act itself was enacted particularly in recognition for the thousands of Native Americans who served in the armed forces during World War I. And it extended citizenship to about 125,000 individuals who didn't otherwise already have citizenship, because Native Americans could gain citizenship by renouncing any claim to their Native ancestry. So while this extension of citizenship should have granted them the right to vote, discrepancies between federal and state control created loopholes that were exploited by various states to deny voting rights to Native Americans, and some states continued to do that until 1957. The next large group of people we see that that citizenship or a path to citizenship is extended to, so that would give another group of people the right to vote in the US, are Chinese immigrants. So in 1882, the US had passed the Chinese Exclusion Act, which prohibited all immigration of Chinese laborers for 10 years, except for merchants, teachers, students, travelers, and diplomats. And then in 1892, it was extended for 10 years, and in 1902, it was made permanent until it was overturned by the Magnuson Act in 1943. When the kind of like the Indian Citizenship Act of 1924, the idea behind this was because during World War II, there was quite a bit of Japanese propaganda about the Chinese Exclusion Act to try to divide the US and Chinese alliance during World War II. Just in the middle of it, we decided let's repeal this act and kind of get away from that propaganda. So when it was repealed, it allowed Chinese individuals to seek citizenship in the United States. So it gave a path to citizenship and thereby a path to voting. The 24th Amendment is the first barrier that, or a first amendment that doesn't specifically allow people to vote, but it does remove a huge barrier to voting. And that is that it removes the poll tax or any other tax from federal elections. So you can't levy, it says you can't levy a poll tax against anyone, specifically in federal elections. And poll taxes, if you're not familiar, are absolutely a form of voter suppression, whereby a uniform fee is levied per individual in order for that individual to be able to vote. Let me go back just one. I want to add that this was something the Confederate States of America did kind of across the board, but lots of states did it. And it doesn't just, the idea isn't just to prevent people of color from voting, although that was generally the CSA's, or the former CSA's motivation. It also prevents poor white people from voting, because if you can't pay a tax, you don't get to vote, right? So the Civil Rights Act of 1964 ostensibly should have removed many more barriers to voting by prohibiting discrimination in public places. And its very first section exclusively talked about voting rights. However, it would actually take an additional act of Congress, which I'm going to talk about in just a second, to solidify those voting rights and make the guarantees of the Title I of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 a reality. And so many people who worked on the Civil Rights Act and pushed for the Civil Rights Act further pushed for this, the Voting Rights Act of 1965. So this one was an act of Congress. So again, now we're extending the franchise and suffrage to more and more people as we remove more and more barriers to people who theoretically have the right to vote, but can't because there are legal barriers in place, right? So the Voting Rights Act of 1965 finally delivered on the promise of the Civil Rights Act by removing those legal barriers for Black and poor enfranchisement. Notably, it banned literacy tests nationwide, and it outlawed poll taxes at all levels, not just federal level. It also gave the federal government authority to send federal registrars and observers to register new voters and oversee elections. So it said the US has the right to come into your state and tell you you're doing this wrong, and we're going to let people vote whether you like it or not, to the states. And it also actually required that any states with a history of discrimination, particularly based on race, would have to submit their redistricting plans to the US Attorney General for approval prior to adopting them. And that was enforced until, I'm never going to remember this year, I think it was 2012, and the case was, what state is it versus Holder? But one of the former Confederate States of America sued the US Attorney General, saying that they no longer needed to do this, and the Supreme Court upheld that. So that's no longer, states no longer have to submit their redistricting plans for approval to the US Attorney. In 1971, the right to vote was once again extended to a whole new group of people who didn't previously have the right to vote, and that was 18 to 21-year-olds. So the entire history of the United States prior to this, you had to be 21 years old in order to vote. Various public officials had supported lowering the voting age during the mid-20th century, but were unable to gain legislative momentum necessary for passing an actual constitutional amendment. The drive to lower the voting age once again came out of a war. It was driven in part by the military draft, the Vietnam War, because the draft conscripted young men between the ages of 18 and 21 into the armed forces. A very common slogan of the proponents of lowering the voting age was old enough to fight, old enough to vote. And then the last two pieces of legislation that are really meant to remove barriers to voting are this one, the Voting Accessibility for the Elderly and Handicapped Act. You would think that this wouldn't be something that might mean a piece of legislation, but in 1984, Congress passed this piece of legislation, which served to remove physical barriers to voting for people with disabilities and the elderly, right? If you can't get a wheelchair over a curb or can't walk the half a block from the parking area to your voting place, right? That's a barrier to voting. So the law requires that all polling facilities must be accessible to all individuals with disabilities. It also states that if no accessible location is available to serve as a polling place, voters must be provided an alternate means of voting. It also requires that all states provide accessibility to registration and voting aids. That they have to provide ballots in large print font and access to aids, including telecommunications devices. Also, states cannot require medical certification or doctor's documentation for casting absentee ballots if that's what you need to do for any medical reason. And in 2015, this was one I learned recently and didn't previously know. In 2015, there was an amendment that says that a polling official may allow a voter who is physically disabled or over the age of 70 to move to the front of the line at their polling place. They just have to ask. You just have to ask a poll worker. And finally, the Uniform and Overseas Citizen Absentee Voting Act removed barriers for people who frequently live overseas because they have to, because they're in the armed forces or related to someone in the armed forces, or are US citizens who employed by the federal government who reside overseas, or you can just be a private citizen who chooses to reside overseas. But mostly it's people who, due to circumstances of their employment, are required to not be in the United States. This law requires that all US states and all US territories, including DC, allow those citizens to register to vote and to vote by absentee ballots in federal elections. So I just want to leave you with some final statistics, and that is that the US Census Bureau estimates that for the 2020 presidential election, voter turnout for US citizens age 18 and over was almost 67%. And that's the highest turnout since the 1960s. In comparison, voter turnout of citizens 18 and over in the 2016 election was just over 61%. That might not seem like a huge difference, but in reality it is. Over 17 million more votes were cast in the 2020 presidential election than the 2016 presidential election, despite there being just over 7 million additional potential voters in 2020 compared to 2016. So something we should understand is that decisions are definitely made by those who show up, or really by those who are allowed to show up, because as we all know, despite our best efforts, barriers to voting still exist in the United States, despite all the changes that we've made over time. So, all right, thank you. I'm not sure who goes next.
Thank you, Courtney. Sorry, I was trying to unmute myself. Noé, would you like to take it away? And we have time for questions at the end. So please hang out, and we will allow you to ask all the questions you would like. So Noé, I believe you're able to share your screen and all the fun
Sure.
stuff.
Well, thank you, Dayla. And I actually do not have slides, so I'll be seeing everyone's beautiful faces or their names, words on there. Thank you so much, Dr. Burns. There's a couple of things that I am going to just briefly discuss also, or at least I guess follow up on what you were discussing, because they definitely overlap. So my name is Noé, pronouns are he, el, ima. I am the program manager with Silver State Voices. We're a nonpartisan nonprofit organization. And a lot of the work that we do is just in civic engagement. One of the coalitions that we help lead is the Let Nevadans Vote Coalition, which is made up of about 24 other different nonpartisan nonprofit organizations. And these organizations dedicate themselves to ensuring that voting is more accessible and convenient for all eligible voters. And during the legislative session, we really focus on those types of bills that are going to ensure that people are able to vote. And this last session, there was a handful of bills that we actually were able to monitor and to ensure that they were passed. And I'm just going to quickly talk about two. The first one was AB 121, which, as was just in the previous presentation, there's a couple of things that will be, I guess, that will come up again. And AB 121 essentially allows for, among other things, it allows for voters with disabilities to be able to request, vote, and cast their ballots using the same method that overseas citizens do. And that's the Uniformed and Overseas Citizens Absentee Voting Act that was just discussed. So, beforehand, they would have to make reach out, make requests, to try to vote that way. Now, it's just basically them reaching out saying, hey, I would like to get this, the abbreviation is the UOCAVA. And once they make that, they can go ahead and basically vote that way. The second bill that I want to talk about, which I'll spend a little bit more time on, was AB 321. And that one did a whole lot of things also. But one of the things that it did is it automatically mails every active registered voter a mail ballot with prepaid postage. And there is an option for voters to opt out. Basically, if they want to go vote in person, if they don't want to receive this ballot in the mail, they can go ahead and opt out and they will not receive anything. It allows for the option to say you want to opt out only for the primaries, only for the generals, or if you just want to opt out entirely. And that's particularly important because in a lot of other states that's not the case. If you want to vote by mail or do an absentee vote, like you have to essentially request that. Before this bill was passed, that was also the case in Nevada. You essentially had to request the ballot, and then you had to meet certain conditions in order to be able to actually cast that ballot through an absentee or through a different method. And that is no longer the case. And that bill also ended up designating or establishing, I should say, a minimum number of polling locations throughout the state of Nevada. But, particularly, I'm just going to focus on Washoe. So what AB 321 states is that in Washoe County during early vote, there needs to be a minimum of 15 early voting locations. And then on election day, there needs to be a minimum of 25 voting locations or vote centers. That's how Washoe County refers to it. And for the first 2 weeks of early voting, the Washoe actually is going to have 20 voting centers. So it's 5 more than what they are required to. And then for election day, they will be providing 66, I believe, voting centers, which is well over the 25 that there should be required per AB 321. And then in terms of the early vote period, it starts next Saturday, October 22nd, and it goes through Friday, November 4th. In Washoe, all these early voting sites will be open at 10 a.m. And then in terms of when they close, the hours will vary, but it will be either 5 p.m., 6 p.m., or 7 p.m. Let me see if I can actually drop the Washoe County's website in the chat, and then I'll be. Oh, you did? Awesome,
Yeah.
Dayla, one step ahead of me. Thank you so much.
Trying to help.
Yes, thank you so much. And so another thing, if other links that I'll be dropping or mentioning, I'll go ahead and put them in the chat and then also send them to you, Dayla, so you can go ahead and send them out with different, however you share this information out. For election day on Tuesday, November 8th, as I mentioned, 66 voting centers, and all of those sites will be open from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. So I had just mentioned earlier about being able to receive that mail ballot with the prepaid postage. And that basically now means that Nevadans have a variety of different ways that they can cast their ballot. The first option is that they can simply wait for that mail ballot to get to them. They fill it out and then they send it back in the mail. Another thing that they could do, if they don't want to do that, is they can go ahead and fill it out. And then during early vote period, which starts next Saturday, they can go and drop off their ballot at any of the polling locations. So in Washoe, it's going to be 20 voting centers. And all of these centers are also drop boxes that they'd be able to do that. Or on election day, they can also drop off the ballots. And then another thing that they could do is if they are unable to, or if they just, because of work or whatever the reason is, they can give their ballot to a trusted person to go ahead and drop it off on their behalf. And again, they would be able to do that during the early vote period or on election day. If for whatever reason an individual a voter has not yet registered, they are able to register the same day registration, and they will be able to register, and then they'll be given a provisional ballot where they can vote. And there's been some talk about, these same day registration, that it's not right, or there's some deceptions or some opportunities for foul play. And I feel that nothing could be further from the truth, because when they register using same day registration, they will receive the provisional ballot, they will fill it out, and then the registrar's office has to verify all of the information before their ballots are able to be counted. So using same day voter registration is, it's a very, very safe and secure way to do that. In terms of one of the things that we end up doing with Silver State Voices is that we also have an election protection program that we collaborate with the ACLU of Nevada and a couple of other of the coalition partners, where we have this nonpartisan election protection program. Essentially, we get volunteers, we ask them to sign up, and then once they send up the request that they would like to be volunteers, we offer a training, and that is one of the things that Daylight will be sending in the chat and sending to you as well. We will be having 4 different trainings. 2 of them will be virtual, and 2 of them will be in person. 1 of them will be in Clark, 1 of them will be in Washoe. And these volunteers, there's some legal volunteers. The ACLU helps recruit the legal volunteers, and Silver State Voices and the different coalition partners that we have, we recruit the non-legal volunteers. We have a training. Essentially what these volunteers are, they're just the eyes and ears. They help pass out snacks, waters to people that are standing in line to vote. That's another misconception that people have, that if in Georgia, if in Texas, if in other states, they're unable to be passing out these snacks or these waters. That is not the case here in Nevada. So the volunteers, we really rely on them to do that. If there are any issues or complications for voters who are being turned away, if there's a high number of, if there's an election center or a voting center where a lot of individuals are not on the rolls, that is something that these volunteers would essentially flag to us so that we can better investigate it, and the ACLU can hop on the phone with either the registrar's office to try to figure out what is the problem and is there a way that we could potentially, resolve that. And so I'll be, when I'm finished with my presentation, dropping some of those links in there, and then just encourage you all, if you have the time and the capacity to do that, to sign up. If you do not, and you know somebody, to please feel free to share that out with folks. And then 2 things before I turn it back over to Dayla. Another thing that we have is a nonpartisan voter guide. Everything that I've been mentioning is on that voter guide. It is votesmartnv.org. And I don't know if Dayla, you already got ahead of me or not, but I'll go ahead and drop that there. This website, it has all the information, the voting centers that I was mentioning, it has them there as well. There's a tab where it now has the ballot questions. There are 3 ballot questions that will be, that voters will be voting on this November. And so, it's essentially taken straight from the Secretary of State's website. There's a tab that has all of the voting locations for Washoe, Clark, and we're seeing if we could potentially upload the ones from the other 15 counties. And these voting sites were all taken from the Secretary of State's website. So, if anyone has questions or was wondering where we got that information, we would be able to direct them to the Secretary of State's website. And then just the very last thing that I just want to briefly touch on is just that it is super, super, super important for folks to be voting all the way down the ballot. There's especially during presidential years, people are thinking, you know, I want to vote for the president, I want to vote for the Senate, the House of Representatives. Those are super, super important. But there's also other elections or other elections that are happening at the lower end of, you know, the ballot that are going to be impacting folks. And it's super, super important to know if you are in an unincorporated part of the county, because at that point, if there's a pothole in your street, if there's issues that, you know, you feel that need to be resolved, the city council, the mayor are not going to be the ones that you would be reaching out to help resolve whatever those issues are. It would actually be the county commissioners. And, you know, it's super important to know, you know, how, you know, where they stand on certain issues. And that Vote Smart website that I had mentioned, they sent out the questionnaire to all of the candidates. So if you see that there's not a response or there's not a picture of any of the particular candidates, it's because they did not respond. And so we basically ended up putting that there. Another races that are super important are the school boards. You know, just because of everything that has been going on nationally, and if anyone who has children, grandchildren, the trustees, they're the ones who oversee the budget and what is considered disciplinary action for the students, and, you know, what should be the penalty or maybe not the penalty. And then the last one that I really just quickly want to highlight is definitely the Secretary of State's office. The Secretary of State's office, they're responsible essentially for overseeing all of the elections in the state of Nevada. The Nevada Secretary of State, they keep records of everything. They also maintain the business portal. So if anyone you know that has a business, wants to start a business, the Secretary of State's website is one of the locations, you know, that they would essentially have to go to. Apart from that, they also help to certify the results of the primaries and the general elections. So, you know, it's super important that we ensure that we're essentially voting all the way down the ballot. And Dale, I'll go ahead and I'll stop right there, and then I'll go ahead and put some of those links on the chat.
Excellent. Thank you, Noé. And the next speaker that we have is Jennifer Willett.
Thank you. Let me share my screen. All right. My name is Jennifer. I am the Nevada Grassroots Manager at All Voting is Local. I am up here in Northern Nevada with you, and I'm going to give you a quick introduction of our organization, and then talk about the context of voting rights and issues in Washoe County, and then conclude with our program of All Power to All Voters. Let's see. So like I said, I work for All Voting is Local. We are partnered with Silver State Voices and Noé, and we love working with them. Our organization similarly believes that our democracy can only work when everyone's voices are heard. So we're really working on making sure that everyone has an opportunity to vote. Our mission with that is to eliminate discriminatory barriers that are needless. From Dr. Burns' presentation, we know that barriers discriminate against historically disenfranchised populations, and we want to make sure that we are tracking these, we are preventing them, and we are trying to remove them as they happen so everyone can vote. Some things that we do, we support voter registration. So we want everyone to be registered to vote and then to stay on the rolls and not get kicked off. Secondly, we want everyone to have as many options as possible to vote so they can fit voting into their busy lives. And then third, we're really focused on making sure every vote is counted. Election officials and the media believe the results, and the results are certified by the county, like Noé was saying. And I'm going to talk about that at the end with some of the actions that you can do. So I'm going to talk about the state of voting rights in Washoe. If you're interested in other counties, this is just for the sake of time. If you're interested in other Northern Nevada counties, please reach out. I can talk about those with you at another time. So like we've gone over, Nevada has really great voting laws. We have same-day registration. Everybody who is registered by today gets a mail-in ballot. And if we're in Washoe, like I think most of us are, you'll get a ballot in Spanish and English. We have early voting that starts October 22nd. We have the Ease Online system that Noé went over, that people can vote online. Tribal nations are entitled to their own polling place now. And we have several new polling places coming up on tribal lands, including one that is going to be in Shoshone, which is really exciting. And our formerly incarcerated residents are automatically restored their right to vote. So on paper, we look really good. Now, we know that after we turned out in record numbers and we had one of the most secure elections in history during a pandemic in 2020, anti-voter groups started pushing for a campaign to dismantle our voting rights. This was based on an idea or a conspiracy theory about fraud when there was no evidence for any fraudulent voting. So now in Washoe, unfortunately, we have anti-voter groups who are trying to pressure to change our procedures and laws, which is going to undermine confidence in the election. It's going to cause chaos, and it's going to disenfranchise the same voters that Dr. Burns went over. Generally, what the quote unquote other side or the anti-voter side wants is they want to eliminate machines because of a conspiracy theory that the machines can be hacked. Because of that, they want to move to all paper ballots and hand counting. Now, as you can imagine, in a place like Washoe or even a smaller county, this will take a really long time to count. It'll be very costly. It's going to be more error-ridden. But importantly, the paper ballots are not ADA accessible. The machines are ADA accessible. So we're going to be leaving out a huge group that won rights to vote, as Dr. Burns went over. There is also a push for voter ID. There's another push to eliminate vote by mail, which everybody loves, right? And there's other pushes to install the National Guard or sheriff's officers at polling places, which is going to scare people away, right? So all of these are barriers that we don't support. We want accessibility in their voting, in our voting. Now, we've seen this come up over and over again in Washoe. So in February and March, one of the county commissioners, Commissioner Herman, proposed many of these things to transition to all paper ballots and to only use one ADA compliant machine, which sounds good on its, or it doesn't sound good, but at least there's one on its face. But the problem is now everybody will see that you're singled out as a disabled person, which also is discriminatory. Commissioner Herman wanted to install county sheriffs at polling locations, which will scare people away. That is voter intimidation. There is a proposal to cancel voter registration after 5 years, which just is completely unnecessary, right? People should register to vote and stay on the rolls. And after a lot of public comment and a couple of meetings, the commission did vote these resolutions down, but they are, you know, in our community in talks about the election. Now in June, we saw our register of voters who runs the election in Washoe resign due to threats and being called a traitor who's guilty of treason because of unfounded claims of voter fraud. So this is not unusual. State and nationwide election workers are getting threatened due to these conspiracy theorists and anti-voter groups, and they are resigning across the state and nation. Also in June for our primary election, we saw in Washoe that these anti-voter groups are very organized. They were demanding to get into where they count the votes. They were yelling at election workers, yelling at voters, and then accusing poll workers of voter interference. We also saw, as Noé said, the county needs to certify the election 10 days after the election. We saw them go to the county and ask them not to certify the election due to conspiracy theories of fraud. So they're still working and organized in this issue. And similar issues like this are happening across the country and our state. Now, the next thing I'm going to show you, like we never do this. We don't want to amplify disinformation, but since this is a learning session, and I think you probably got this, I'm going to show it to you, but definitely when you go out, do not use this tactic of amplifying disinformation. So maybe a week and a half ago, you probably got this in the mail. And this is more disinformation that went out to, we think, maybe every address in Washoe. We're not entirely sure. If you look at the bottom left, this paper is claiming that an algorithm in the machines will change your vote. And if you look on the right, what they're demanding is getting rid of machines, repealing AB 321, as Noé said, that is the mail vote law, and advocating for voter ID. So groups are definitely organized and trying to implement barriers to voting. Now, in response, we always say, don't agonize, organize. So we know that the Nevada's election experts are united around the fact that the 2020 election and the 2022 primary were safe and secure, and there is no need to change our whole election system based on a non-problem. We also know that many of these tactics are going to be discriminatory towards people and will likely suppress votes of people of color, young voters, first-time voters, disabled voters, and people with limited English proficiency. Now, we really like to support our election officials, but we also think that they need to be accountable to the people they serve, right? And not just the loudest people in the room. So what we do, one of the things that we do is we have the All Power to All Voters program. And really what that is trainings around these kind of complicated election administration policies and procedures. We know you do not have time to sit and follow all of these little tiny changes every day, but we do, right? That's our job. So we can follow that and then break it down for groups. We then talk about the context, like much more in depth than what I just went into. And the whole point of that is to get enough training to be involved in the process. So in addition to state of voting rights, we go over how to give testimony and public comment so we can be there giving pro-voter public comments. We talk about doing things like working the polls and volunteering for EP. We're big supporters of election protection under Silver State Voices. And then we have some trainings to do that can be whatever you want to do to be involved in the process. So we can do get out the vote party trainings, voter registration trainings, or anything else. And so far, we've really focused on people who are most likely to be impacted by some of these changes. So we've trained Upward Bound, who is a college prep program for first-generation college students who are income qualified. So they are likely to be hit by these barriers, right? We've also trained Bonner leaders who are similar populations, but they are in college. So also getting the youth involved. Now, the idea with that is to form a county-focused group that builds relationships between them and their community and election officials so we can do what is needed. We can support election officials if that is what is needed, if they're being targeted. We can advocate for voting rights if that is what is needed in the county. So we really want to support strong public servants and stand up for voter accessibility and against any barriers or intimidation tactics. And we can do this all for any of you if you want to too. So just some examples of things that we've thought. When we see voter disinformation going out, like intentionally misleading people with those newsletters, we're going to hold an education event so we get the right information out. If we know there's going to be disruption on election day, we as a group can work election protection with Silver State Voices to make sure that there are eyes and ears on the ground and we can resolve issues in real time. If we know that people are advocating for voting barriers, we're there providing public comment for voting rights. And if we know that our election officials are being threatened, we're there to build relationships and support them and speak to their good work. So we can do this with any of you if you want. We have a number of trainings that we can provide. We also have sub-grants with that we can use to support the group involvement. We've provided stipends through these sub-grants, or we've paid for other things that people need. We have voter cards, which I put up there. It doesn't really look that good, but they're very cute. I can drop them off. I can drop off as many as you want, that people can scan the QR code and get all of the dates and locations where they can vote. And then we always ask people to volunteer for election protection so that those roles are filled and we're making sure that things aren't happening on the ground. So to finish up, I'll end with a call of action too. Like we've discussed a couple of times, counties need to certify the election results 10 days after election day. We are expecting that the election denying groups will be at the county asking them not to certify based on fraud. And we know that our elections are run really strongly and securely. So if you feel like you would like to, I would love for you to join me at the certification hearing after the election on November 18th and ask the county to certify. I can train you as much or as little as you want, and I can also help you with your talking points so you feel confident in being able to do this. So thank you so much. If you are interested in anything that I've had to say, please give me an email. I'd love to drop off voter cards or talk more about county actions with you.
Sorry, I'm not on camera. Okay, there you go. Fantastic. Thank you so much. Does anyone have questions that they'd like to ask? I believe you are able to come off of mute and ask away.
I have a question. So Jennifer, if you do go to vote and you are and somebody is there trying to intimidate you, what should you do?
I think you have a number of options. I think that one of the things that we work on is having people feel confident. So if somebody is yelling at you or saying lies like you're not allowed to vote, you know that is wrong and you can go in and vote with confidence. So I think part of that is voter education. If other people are there threatening you, that is where the election protection volunteers can really come in handy. Like I do election protection, it's really fun and rewarding, but I have seen intimidation and I was able to report it to our command center leads who then resolve the issue within minutes, which is really the point of us being there, right? To resolve it like in real time. But I would like, if you feel like you're not safe, I would maybe think of a different location or a way to vote. Also, there are election workers there that want you to be able to vote. I think reporting any intimidation that you're feeling to them, they can help resolve it because they have different structures that they might decide, you know, if there's a big group there, they might need to call the law enforcement if needed, right? Or they might call the registers of voters if needed. But I think the thing you don't do is you don't vote, right? Because then they get exactly what they want. So if you can think through different ways, feel confident in what you want to do, and there are people there to support you. Also, Noé's group runs a hotline that you could call for support and they can help you kind of figure out what to do next.
Thank you.
I think it's probably in the chat somewhere, the number to the hotline, but if not, I'm sure he'll drop it in.
I will drop that. Thank you, Jennifer. The other thing that I do just want to lift up momentarily is the election protection volunteers. So the first thing that we tell the volunteers is, you know, we don't want you to go and solve the problems. We just need to know what those issues are. If it's a matter of they asked you for your ID, even though you're not required, and this is the workers, and you're not required to show your ID, that's something that the volunteers could potentially resolve, since that is something that we do during the volunteer training. If it's this intimidation, like you're suggesting in this example, we would definitely not tell them, you know, to go ahead and try to resolve it. It would just be more, all right, try to find out who that voter is, get their basic information, and then, you know, me as the election protection volunteer would flag that up to the person who I'm supposed to. And then from there, either our organization or the ACLU would be able to get in contact with the registrar's office saying, hey, at, you know, the Reno, the downtown mall, this is what's essentially what's happening. And then from there, they would be able to further investigate that and then try to resolve it. The other thing that we could do with those volunteers is if we see that at the corner, you know, there's a bunch of people with signs and saying, you know, and it's those individuals that are just basically saying, you know, that the election is being stolen and that these individuals shouldn't be voting because they're not eligible. If we see a group of them, we could tell the volunteers, okay, if you see that, you know, people are getting coming off from the bus stop, reroute them in this direction so that they don't even have to interact with the group there. And so that's why, you know, we really do encourage people to volunteer so that they can help us mitigate and ensure that we're minimizing any of those types of interactions with those individuals. But I do agree with everything Jennifer said. And if y'all just bear with me for a moment, I'll go ahead and I'll put all the different hotlines. There are an English hotline, Spanish, API. Yeah. Yes, it is. Thank you so much, Taylor. But
because I was a volunteer.
Yes, and Arabic, I believe. And so we'll go ahead and we'll put those numbers in the chat as well.
This is what you get to wear as you're observing, because I volunteered because we are partners with Silver State Voices, and Noé was like, so when are you volunteering? I'm like, okay. I'll go sit in the library. Jane, did you have a question?
Yeah, I do. First of all, I want to thank all of our speakers. This was really informative to get the history, and it was a really nice complement of speakers, so thank you. And Jennifer, the Robert Beadle's piece that came out, the disinformation piece, what are your plans to address that? And what can we, I mean, are you looking at each little fact that they put on there that's not a fact?
Yes, we have run a digital campaign that has the correct information out. So again, we know that, you know, outside of this learning environment, we don't want to amplify things that he's saying. We want to get out just the right information. So you might see our ads with the information on something like Facebook. But yeah, it's really scary. I think that, you know, getting more information out to communities that are historically disenfranchised is one of our main objectives, and what we really try to partner with local organizations doing. That's also the point of the voter cards, right? To get the right information out into the community in an accessible way. And then, you know, instead of responding directly to the newsletter from Beatles, Beatles' blog has said repeatedly that they are all going to show up at the Register of Voters on election day. So we know that we will also be there with Silver State Voices on election day to make sure everybody is safe and the election is going fine without intimidation. And then preparing for the election certification, which they will certainly also be at. So to have that counter voice in the community.
A follow-up question to that. I'm seeing so many ads on YouTube that are just lies. And is it up to the candidate to refute those, or is that something you're doing? I mean, it's just incredible to me, the lies that they're putting out as advertisements.
Right. It's also incredible to me too. We are definitely nonpartisan as well, so we don't take a stance on electoral politics. But yes, it's concerning. It's also concerning the lies about, election fraud. So I don't know. Noé, do you know who is?
In terms of the candidates, or if, if there's that candidate smearing, no, I'm not sure. If it were to be something like, you need to request a ballot, you need to reach out, to the registrar's office to receive a ballot, or you have to vote in person unless you have a disability, things like that. That is something that we would be able to mobilize and say like, no, this is actually false. But if it's particularly about a candidate or candidates, things like that, we wouldn't take a stand on it.
Super. Thanks.
It's very frustrating because some of it currently falls under First Amendment. Nobody has to refute it or even support it. It's just people counting on, the more times you hear it, you start to believe it. And it's, and you have people who have a lot of money, and, with nonprofits, we don't have that sort of money to be able to also publish, a refute of like that big paper and send it to everybody, so we can, it's frequently just reaching out to your neighbors and saying, hey, I don't know if you got this, I did, but these are problematic.
Yeah,
Right?
and I think, Dayla, what you're saying definitely is spot on, because some of the different resources that were provided here, I know the Washoe County Elections Department would be a really good resource. Again, if it's more just election related, right? Someone saying that you can't vote at such location, or you can't drop it off, or I can't have Jennifer, drop off my ballot because we're not related. That type of stuff. And the official sample ballot for Washoe, I believe it should have something on there. If not, just looking through the Washoe County's website and then sharing that with whoever, if it is the neighbor or the relative, letting them know that, no, what you saw on the newspaper and the ads, like, that's not accurate. Here is the accurate information. Voter guides, things like that are nonpartisan, I think, would also be helpful. But definitely the first place to go to would be, if not the Washoe County Registrar's Office, the Secretary of State's website.
And if you see it on social media, you can also report the ads frequently. So I'd report them and say, these are spreading lies about voting access and things like that. So, other questions, comments, concerns? I want to share my screen with my brilliant presentation, because I do have social media resources up and we can include this in our follow-up. But we do have the social media for, All Voting is Local, Silver State Voices, Waterford.org, which is Courtney's organization. I don't think we mentioned that. Then also the Women's March Reno is for Northern Nevada Marches Forward.
And if you, unlike the other speakers, if you go to waterford.org or Waterford Upstart, my job has nothing to do with voting. It's about early childhood education. So you'll be very surprised about 4-year-olds and reading, if that's what you're looking for.
Yes. But the information that you bring is very important. And so otherwise, thank you again, like Jane said, thank you to our speakers, Courtney, Noé, and Jennifer. Thank you so much for doing this. You are, champions in your communities, and it's always an honor working with you in the various ways that I'm able to do that. So, I'm always humbled and inspired to do better and to do more. So I really appreciate you all. And again, please visit northernnevadamarchesforward.org if you would like to see, if you'd like to rewatch this program, to hear my dog's beautiful chorus at the beginning, because they just are, a day without them is like a day without sunshine. And, but also to see our previous programs. We have some really phenomenal programs that we've had, and, feel free to watch them. They provide great resources in them. And, we're very proud of this series. So, thank you again for being involved with this. And we will give you some of your time back unless people have further questions. Thank you, Carol. Bye. Bye, Sarah.